Hi, this is Annie Grace, and welcome to this Naked Mind podcast. Today I am here with Jolene Park, and Jolene is a functional nutritionist and a very good friend of mine. We both live here in Denver, and thank you so much, Jolene, for joining.
This is fun. Thanks for asking me, Annie.
Oh, it's awesome. So recently, Jolene has become quite famous. She had a TED Talk, which is awesome, and just such a cool thing on such a cool topic. So I want to talk to you about your TED Talk. And maybe we can just dive in there, but I also would really love you to share your story. So any way you want to intertwine it is great for me.
Sure. Well, my TED Talk was the culmination of my story over all the years. And it was my title of the talk was Gray Area Drinking, Nourishing Your Nervous System in a New and Revolutionary Way. So, as a functional nutritionist, I'd studied brain chemistry, neurotransmitters, kind of the physiological mechanisms that happen around cravings with sugar and alcohol. And then my own story has been while I've been working in corporate wellness over the years and working with people one-on-one, I loved red wine and fit in really well how I drank red wine. But it was becoming more and more of a problem, especially kind of around the 38, 43-year-old period. And I quit drinking when I was 43. So the TED Talk was a kind of a mixture of a little bit of my story, of the back and forth merry-go-round. I would stop drinking at times. I'd say, oh, I'm doing a paleo challenge. I'm just not drinking for a while. And it slid under the radar really well because of the work that I did. And people are like, oh, okay, you're doing wellness and nutrition. That makes sense since I didn't get hassled too much. And then I would, my own mind be like, I want to drink. Like, why am I being so restrictive? And I'd go back to drinking. But it was escalating for me. It was becoming really, really easy and very much a habitual pattern to be drinking, in the end, most days. The last year that I quit, I was drinking most days. And it was also becoming very easy to say, I'm just going to have a glass of wine while I'm starting to make dinner tonight. And I would end up drinking the whole bottle. And that was the pattern that I knew that I didn't want to keep continuing.
And it's really cool because in your wellness work, you obviously were probably quite a bit more aware. I know for me, wellness was sort of, the last thing from my mind. I was young and I was healthy and, whatever. So I didn't have that kind of same cognitive awareness around how alcohol impacts my body. So I think your story is unique in that not only were you super aware and taking these breaks, but you were very mindful to recognize the escalation as it was happening instead of recognizing it kind of in hindsight after something negative had happened.
Yeah, it's funny, and the other part of my story is anxiety. I've always been a pretty anxious person. And through my drinking would think, oh, just I'm an anxious person, but didn't kind of realize how much the alcohol was making me anxious. And part of that anxiety, I can also be a bit of a hypochondriac. So, I think that was some of it too. But there was also things I didn't realize. I remember calling my nurse practitioner, my women's health doctor, a couple of years ago. I think it was maybe like a year and a half before I stopped drinking. And I set up a call with her on my lunch hour, and I went the place I was working, sat in my car in the parking lot, and said, my anxiety is really up, and I'm drinking too much. And that was the first time I kind of said that to my healthcare practitioner. And the first thing she said to me is, she said, the connection between alcohol and breast cancer, don't you? And I didn't. I hadn't heard that. For working in wellness and the work that I do, that was the first time I'd heard that. So yeah, I mean, I was doing the work I was doing, but there were still things I didn't know. And it was more just my personal anxiety story that was driving my drinking and then also made me worry about my drinking.
And so every time you would take these breaks, it was relatively easy, or would you say it was difficult? Did you deal with cravings while you were on a break, or how did it work?
Um, that's a good question. I'm a pretty like when I make a decision kind of person. I have an all or nothing component to myself. So there was that. I wasn't to that level of dependency where I guess like physically, it was difficult, but it would be hard emotionally, psychologically. because I was very much in that pattern of, at the end of the day, it could be a really good day, but I just wanted a downshift. My mind was really revved up. I'd been working. I'd put a lot of energy out, either teaching or speaking or coaching. It wasn't that it was bad stress, but my brain was on kind of that hyper on mode all the time. And so I wanted the wine then because it worked. It did. I mean, the first 20 minutes, it absolutely worked. But yeah, that pattern was harder to get out of, because that was becoming just kind of my only go-to thing to shut off that anxious brain.
And so would you say that the tools you had before you stopped using in favor of the wine, or when you stopped, did you have to build new tools, or was it kind of a combination?
Yeah. So when I would stop, and I stopped many times over the years, I did. And that's what I call kind of that gray area, merry-go-round, back and forth drinking. I stopped for almost 18 months at one point, because I was doing a lot of yoga, and the yoga program I was in, a big part of it was, not to drink alcohol, that style of yoga. And so I just quit. And then there was a time where I stopped for 7 months, and I would stop for 30 days and do paleo. So I did a lot of that. And, but I just stopped. But then I had nothing in place for when life got hard and the anxiety came up. So when I got to the point of, I don't want to keep doing this stopping and starting, it's a problem. I know it's a problem. It's becoming a real problem. That's when I consciously started putting in some of the things I talk about in my TED Talk, of what are some of those biochemical pieces, some of the kind of the somatic, the body psychology of bringing the body out of that fight, flight, freeze response, and just doing some things to kind of synchronize, harmonize the brain chemistry. And I was very purposeful and very focused on that, knowing I'm stopping for good. I've got to do some things to kind of rebalance, rebuild, and replenish my body and brain.
And so 2 questions. One is stopping for good. Did you know it was for good? Like the time you knew this is it, you knew this was it?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
I did. And again, it wasn't just I was quiet about my drinking. I've said this in other interviews and things. The majority of my drinking was, at the end of the day, I'm not married. So, coming home after a work day, I traveled a lot. And so it was very easy to, go out to dinner, often after finishing a work project, or I'm home. And again, it was that I'm going to have a glass. Oh, screw it. I had the glass. I'll have another glass. Okay, I'll have another glass. So that was I drank like that on my own a lot of the time, or I'd go out with friends and have 1 or 2 glasses and then stop somewhere on the way home, or come home and open another bottle. And so people didn't know that. People didn't kind of see that was happening. And there was never any negative ramification, but that was how I was living. And then in that, I'd be like, oh, I'm just, now I'm not going to drink for a while. And people are like, okay, I guess you're just, because you work in health and wellness, that makes sense. But they didn't know that kind of that quiet, alone drinking was happening. So I had done so much of that stopping and starting, that I got to that point on December 14th, 2014, that it wasn't just kind of a flippant, oh, I just woke up one day and decided I'm not going to drink anymore. It was many years of internal kind of angst and struggle and back and forth, that because of that, I knew in my bones, no matter what happened in the future, good or bad, alcohol wasn't going to be an option for me anymore. And I was very clear and resolute about making that decision for myself. And that was also quiet. Then I didn't say that and kind of articulate that to a lot of people in the first couple months. But the more time has gone on, then I've started kind of bridging my story, because I think the neurotransmitter piece, I think the physiology piece, understanding the stress response is so important. And I love that stuff. But then I had to start telling my story of why I love it and why I'm so interested in it, because I personally struggled and went through it for many years.
Oh, that's so interesting. So my second question is right on that tact is, what tips can you give listeners about how to support the brain with other things besides alcohol?
Yeah. Well, first of all, not putting alcohol in the brain.
Number one.
Number one is a great first step. Um, and it does, as you know, as time goes on, the more days, weeks, and months that you string together without alcohol in the brain, it just makes it easier. The brain starts to lose kind of that cellular memory of it. But it's not about white knuckling it and just kind of jumping off the cliff and not drinking. So taking alcohol out's, a good first step. But then I start with the physiology. Physiology is my foundation, the physical side of things. And so I think there's a couple pieces to look at. The first is blood sugar, because alcohol can really wreak havoc on the blood sugar roller coaster. I've also been pretty hypoglycemic and a low blood sugar person, which played into my anxiety. I wish I would have known that, like in high school, when I had panic attacks and would feel so anxious I wouldn't eat and didn't really know about nutrition and would drink soda. And it just made it worse, of that spiking and dipping of the blood sugar makes anxiety worse, makes cravings worse. So one of the best things to do is just simply eat on a regular basis. I know it sounds like, well, we want something like some big magic thing, but there's a lot of magic in eating within 30 to 60 minutes of waking, and then eating midday, and then at the end of the day, breakfast, lunch, dinner. What you eat, we can get more specific, but just eat. Like, I find so many people don't eat, skip meals, go all day, and then our blood sugar is so low, and then we want alcohol, we want sugary things. So start with eating on a regular basis. When you eat, choose protein. And the reason I say choose protein is because protein breaks down into amino acids. And amino acids are the raw materials that make dopamine, serotonin, and GABA, those neurotransmitters that regulate cravings, that tell us we're not anxious, we're not depressed, we can sleep. And the things that feed those and keep that kind of up regulated is amino acids from protein. So eat regularly. Choose protein, whatever you like, animal protein, vegetable protein, it doesn't matter. And then eat a healthy fat, primarily an omega-3 fat. Omega-3 fats are also the raw materials that make serotonin and dopamine. They feed the brain, help balance blood sugar, as does protein. And then carbohydrates, just to keep your energy stable. But, carbs is an interesting category, because often people will say, I'm not eating carbs. And I say, what does that mean? Because there's kind of, the first is fruits and vegetables. The second is starchy, grainy, floury, kind of cereal, bread type products. And then the third category is desserts and candies and soda and alcohol and all the sweet stuff. So when people say, I'm not eating carbs, are you not eating broccoli? Or are you not eating M&Ms?
Right.
So ideally, every time you're eating, you're having a big supply of vegetables as your carbohydrate source, which are not going to spike your blood sugar really high, but the fiber will fill you up. And there's so many rebuilding kind of antioxidants, minerals, and vitamins that are in the colorful vegetables. So pick a protein, pick a healthy fat. And healthy fats are things like chia seeds, flax seeds, fish oil, walnuts, avocados, and then pick whatever vegetables you like, and stay really hydrated with water. And that can go, just getting that baseline in can go a really long way when you first start giving up alcohol.
Oh, that's huge. It's so important. I feel like my entire life changed when I just started eating protein on a regular basis. The amount of, so much work into like different antidepressants and quitting drinking and everything else, and everything had its piece and everything, worked a little bit. But literally when the biggest change came literally overnight was when my naturopath just said, wake up, and as soon as you wake up, you need protein, and you need a lot of it, and you need to keep eating it. And it was like, wow, that emotionally just changed everything for me. It was incredible.
Yeah, and especially coming out of, if you've been drinking regularly, if your body's used to like having however many drinks in the evening on a pretty frequent basis, blood sugar gets really wacky. So in the morning, blood sugar is really low. That's often what we're feeling, is kind of that. I would always feel so nauseated and queasy. It's low blood sugar, from the dip with the alcohol because it really, drops your blood sugar. So coming in with some protein will start to bring that blood sugar back up and balance things out. So
That's so cool.
it's an important piece.
That's really cool. And just skipping around a little bit, but I love the title of your TED Talk, Gray Area Drinking. And how would you define what gray area drinking is?
I think gray area drinking is how most people drink. So I'll tell you what I think is not gray area drinking. People who have a drink every now and again, like every couple months or every couple weeks, they might go to a wedding and have a glass of champagne. That's not gray area drinking. What's also not gray area drinking is end stage, like cirrhosis of the liver. Your eyes are yellow with jaundice because, gotten so pickled from alcohol. That's not gray area drinking. So those are kind of the two extremes. And I kind of think anything in between that falls in the gray area because there's no, like the government guidelines, that there's no kind of approved, how do I say it, level of alcohol, that there's no okay level of alcohol to put in your body.
Right.
So, and for women, 1 5-ounce glass of wine every day is actually considered moderate drinking. 2 5-ounce glasses of wine is heavy drinking. So I was drinking heavy with, when I would have 2 to 4 glasses, which was very easy to do. So, and that's kind of the coveted, like, oh, if I could just have a glass or 2 of wine, it's actually moderate heavy drinking. So I think we've done a real disservice, and the paradigm that I want to shake is this end stage, lose everything, lost a job, have a DUI, have cirrhosis of the liver. That's extreme, extreme, extreme end stage. And, a couple drinks on a regular basis throughout the week is moderate heavy drinking, which is gray area drinking.
And it's so interesting, and I think I might even have it on my desk, but there's a study by the CDC, and it said of people, so it defines excessive drinking as just 1 more glass than that one per day. So it's 8 glasses, 5-ounce glasses of wine per week for women is excessive drinking. So if you're drinking just 1 more than that one per day, you're in excessive drinking according to the CDC. And then what's also interesting is of excessive drinkers, only 10% are considered, quote, alcoholic, even though they don't use that term, but
Right.
physically dependent on alcohol. So the 90% is really, I think, what you're talking about here, such an important audience. But then interestingly, and I just want to share this, and I might have shared it before, but this is the DSM-5. So this is like the diagnostic statistical manual for how every single disorder is categorized. And there's 11 questions, and the presence of at least 2 yeses indicates an alcohol use disorder, which I think you would say would be a gray area drinking. And it's interesting because it can be mild, 2 to 3 symptoms, moderate, 4 to 5, and then severe, 6 or more. But I want to just, for listeners, these are 2 of the questions. Have you had times when you ended up drinking more or longer than you intended?
Which was often every time I drank, right? I'm just going to have a glass of wine. Screw it, I'll order a second glass.
Right.
Now that I've had 2, I'll just have 3.
And who do we know who is a drinker, who isn't in this, this glass of champagne at a wedding category, who hasn't on occasion gotten sick or hasn't on occasion been, most people do end up drinking. And this is in the last year. So in the past year, just one time, if you've drank more or longer than you intended, that's a yes to one question. And then the other one is, have you had to drink more than you once did to get the effect you want? So that's a yes to 2 questions. And that for me, as you just said, people might say, okay, most of the population, I take issue with that. But actually, according to our statistical manual, that is alcohol use disorder, a mild form of alcohol use disorder. Those 2 things, which again, most people would say yes to those 2 things.
Yeah. And when I was drinking, this is another thing I didn't know. For working in health and wellness, I actually didn't know that whole thing about 1 drink every day or 7 drinks a week is moderate drinking.
Right.
Like how easy I was basically in 2 nights, I could get 7 drinks. and out with others who were, we're all drinking like that and more.
Right.
I didn't, that was something that I didn't know. So really, again, for me, it wasn't like, oh, I work in health and wellness, I'm making this decision to be healthy. It was not that. This was a real internal struggle for me, for many years. And the misery of that back and forth and just living that back and forth. Because I would feel I loved the immediate effect. That first 20 minutes into a glass of wine, I love it. But I would always then have the back end effect of being so queasy and so nauseous and my blood and the whole next day feeling so gross, and still, continuing to drink on a really regular basis. As someone who doesn't like to throw up, doesn't like to be sick, has a hypochondriac, but was doing that, I knew I was dipping my toes far and deep into the problem drinking pool. And, and it's not, it's not like, oh, I quit and I never think about it again or want to drink. But I got to that point of, I can't keep living like this. It's more miserable to live the back and forth merry-go-round than to just have a really uncomfortable anxiety kind of, intense day.
Right. And then, by the way, when you do have an anxiety intense day, you are a person who I know for sure has developed so many tools to deal with that you wouldn't have developed or you wouldn't have learned about or you wouldn't have come across had you continued numbing it with something that, yeah, sure, that first 20 minutes is nice, but then ultimately it, it's quite harmful in the long run.
Yeah. Yeah. So, there's the basic nutrition side of things, which I certainly did. But I also pulled in some more of kind of the functional medicine side of things. And there's some herbs that can boost GABA. I have low, as an anxious person, my GABA is low. That's why I was attracted to drinking, because it gives me that feeling of like that, kind of that calm, like warm honey just kind of moved from my head through my toes, like that anti-anxiety feeling. And so I had to do more than just eat protein to do that. And I don't take antidepressants or anti-anxiety medication. So there was some herbs that I put into play and was very consistent with those the first couple months after not drinking. And then I don't know if you and I have ever talked about, do you know the Alpha-Stim?
Mm-mm.
It's a little cranial device. I don't have it here at my desk, but you clip it on your earlobes. And it's FDA approved for anxiety, depression, and insomnia. And I learned about it at a functional medicine conference 10 years ago when I was still drinking for anxiety, depression, insomnia, and got it at a really reduced rate. So I had this device. And I would use it off and on and felt, it certainly can it would help me like fall asleep and things. So it's just a little zap on the ears. And it helps to boost GABA, serotonin, and dopamine. And that was something that I used daily when I quit drinking. And that's the type of stuff where it's like, I knew these tools, I had these tools, but I had to be really kind of focused of, I now need to use these if I'm making the decision that alcohol isn't what I'm going to use to regulate anxiety. So I used some herbs. I used the Alpha-Stim. It's a little pricey, but people can take a look at their website. I'm not connected with them in any financial or other way, but it's a nice device to know about. And then the other thing that I started doing was somatic experiencing therapy. So I was studying yoga and had some really good yoga teachers who are trained in somatic, meaning body. So kind of that body experience of learning how to tolerate the anxiety in the body. And kind of that clenching, in my stomach, or that of like, I just want to get out of this and numb it and kind of jump out of my skin, and how to sit with that. And so that was another really important piece for me. So it was bigger than I just decided to quit drinking and now I eat breakfast.
Right. No, that's huge. I recently saw a post in one of the groups about an herb, Kava. Was that one of the ones? Or do you know anything about that herb as an anti-anxiety herb?
Yeah. Kava can be, an option. It's not something I personally use. There was some stuff about it last couple of years about concern if it was raising liver enzymes. And what it did to the liver, which alcohol will also raise your liver enzymes. And I don't know. I'm kind of on the fence with that. I mean, I think if you use it as directed, you're not going to get a jump in liver enzymes. But I personally don't feel very good on Kava. Like, it actually makes me feel a little drunk and kind of woozy. I don't like the effect of it. But you can get it in any health food store. But the herbs that I used were passion flower, lemon balm, and holy basil.
Okay.
And people can Google those, take a look at them. There's all lots of good data on all three of those herbs for naturally boosting GABA. It's not a drug effect. There's not side effects if you use it as directed on the label. I will say I took it in a tincture form, so liquid, and I would put it in, I'd pull up in the little tincture and then put it in water. If you're listening and you're very, very sensitive to alcohol, like, you mouthwash and all of that, in those tinctures, they will use a little alcohol as a preservative. So you can get those tinctures with glycerin if you don't want the alcohol component. Or you can take them as capsules too, so you don't have that. But the research on lemon balm, passion flower, and holy basil, I also like holy basil in a tea. And sometimes it's known as Tulsi tea, Tulsi, and you can just have a really calming, relaxing effect. So those were three things that I personally used.
Oh, that's great.
And I don't take them now. So kind of to get through those first initial weeks and months as my GABA was coming back up into balance, because alcohol just really depletes it. So I had to kind of rebuild those receptors. I used the herbs, and now I don't take them.
That's great. And about how long would you say did you start really feeling normal?
Well,
define normal. Do we ever feel normal?
I know, right. I can, across the board, of course, when you stop drinking, you generally, like, I feel better when I wouldn't drink. But I would hit those moments of, right, because, dealing with then the anxiety. And so I remember it wasn't like day-to-day life, I didn't feel well. But I do remember certain kind of mile markers on the road. I remember at about 4 months, like, it was really like, I want to drink. Like this, I just want to drink a bottle of wine. And that was 4 months in. And I did a somatic experiencing therapy session, with my therapist, working on some of that body regulation. And I remember doing that session with her. So I remember, 4 months, there was a piece. I remember hitting 9 months and thinking like, oh, I feel like I kind of turned a corner. Like, I'm just not thinking about this as much. And again, there was a lot of thought in it of like what I'm doing daily with herbs and, making the decision not to drink. 9 months, I felt like I turned a corner. A year, I think, is pretty pivotal and pretty profound, going a whole 12-month cycle through 4 seasons, through everything. But it's definitely, there's waves will hit. But on a day-to-day basis, I felt overall so much better by not drinking.
Oh, that's awesome. That's really cool. One of the things I was going to ask you is, I know that you do, so now in your work, can you share a little bit about what you do and where people can find you, especially if they want to learn more about anything that you've been talking about?
Yeah. So people can find me at healthydiscoveries.com. I work with people one-on-one. In a coaching relationship, and I'm just adding a consulting piece to that. So how I've been working with people, I work with a lot of high achieving professionals. So their story is very similar to mine. Job title is amazing, achieving in their life. They've got their family. They've, kind of got these pieces going, but there's that silent struggle that, only they kind of know at the 3 a.m. mark. They're like, why did I do this again? Kind of that type of back and forth drinking. So that's who I work with on a one-to-one basis. And we do an initial intake call to just really hear their story, hear their pattern. It gives me an idea of their brain chemistry, their stress response, what's going on with their metabolism. From there, I set up really concrete action steps, pulling in functional nutrition pieces, the somatic psychology, the kind of the brain balancing. And then they have contact with me every day. So they'll follow up with accountability, email check-in. We can tweak things along the way. If they're having a hard time, they can SOS, email me questions or wobbles. And then we have a call. I either do video calls or telephone calls with them each week. And so I work with people 30 days, 60 days, or 90 days, just depending on what they need. And I'm adding in a new consulting piece where if people are like, I don't really need a full 90-day piece, but I just want to sit down and kind of, they want to pick my brain for 90 minutes. So they've got me. And they just kind of want to get back on track, get refocused, get that jump start of what are the resources, what are the practical tools, what are some of those missing pieces they may not have known about their, biochemistry, about their blood sugar, their brain chemistry. So I'll work on kind of a one-off consultation too. So I coach and I consult.
Oh, that's so cool. That's awesome. And I have sent people your way and had just amazing responses. People love working with you. So. That's great. So I always ask this question sort of at the end, but my question is, what would you tell the Jolene of before, who was starting and stopping kind of in that experience, about what kind of life is like here on the other side of things?
Oh, goodness. It's so much better. So much better to be out of that grip of going back and forth. And it's just so much better. And I've met so many people as a result, Annie, you being one of them. And there's just this whole movement and this whole new wave, and it's not going to stop. It's going to get bigger and bigger. I really believe we're going to start looking at alcohol the way we were looking at cigarettes in the 60s and 70s. It's not that people, everyone's going to stop drinking, but the paradigm is going to shift. And so it's a great movement to be part of and to connect with just so many like-minded people that, it's not even that we may talk about not drinking, but it's just like, wow, because we've both made this decision to not drink, there's all these other things that, we have in common and are like-minded. So it's opened up a whole new realm for me of relationships and connection, which was a core thing for me of wanting to stop. Because of connection and relationships, with men. Because I look early on at, that was when it turned for me, was after a real devastating breakup. I wasn't a big drinker in high school or college. And then there was a breakup in my late 20s that I was just crushed over. And in that kind of grief and pain, I remember drinking a bottle of wine and being like, why have I not done this? But this thing's amazing. It just shuts off all that pain. But that's what got me, that set kind of the stage. My body remembered that and continued, really through my 30s and first part of my 40s. And I really looked at that saying, I want this connection. I want, these connected, I want to be married. And I really felt like how I was drinking was keeping me from ever having that connection and that intimacy that I wanted. And that was a huge why of why I stopped. And it's so true. Drinking was keeping me from that.
Oh, that's so cool. That's awesome. What a good thing to tell your past self and all our listeners. Well, Jolene, this has just been such a pleasure. Thank you so much for coming on. We'll have to have you back and I feel like we, barely scratched the surface. I really wanted to get into your story a bit, which I appreciate you doing, but just barely scratched the surface of just so much knowledge that you have in this area about the body, about the mind, about the relationship between the two. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
This has been Annie Grace with This Naked Mind podcast. Thank you so much for listening. You can learn more at thisnakedmind.com. And please remember to rate, review, and subscribe, as it really helps us spread the word.